I'm going to talk tonight primarily about 3 species of blind catfish that live in the Edwards Aquifer. I'm going to talk about a group of blind salamanders who are also aquifer specialists, and what we're doing to study them and hopefully provide valuable information for management of those species. So just to introduce myself a little more, I'm the director of the Center for Conservation and Research at San Antonio Zoo, and what Charlie left out was us a state reptile and amphibian biologist for Parks and Wildlife for 7 years, so I'm not making this stuff up. Oh, I'm out to click it. Sorry, guys. All right, this beautiful species is a Mexican blind cat. It's known from about a dozen sites in Coahuila, Mexico, historically. Many of those sites no longer have water, so they no longer have blind cats. I'll get into that a little bit more. But these are incredibly specialized organisms. So these animals here, they're about 2.5 to 3 inches long. We have an individual at the zoo who was obtained from the wild in 1997. So they're very long-lived. There's no reason to think they're going to live a century once they reach adulthood. But these guys are little, tiny, gelatinous, almost catfish, and they're actually the great white sharks of their ecosystem, if you can imagine that. And the other 2 stars of the show tonight are Satan, the wide-mouthed blind cat, and toothless blind cat, also known as Troglodilus pattersoni. These are really terrible-looking specimens because they're some of the only material we had from them. There are no live specimens available, and as you'll see later on in my talk, there's no genetic material available for some of the material. So it gives you an idea of typical size of Satan. This is the absolute top predator in the Edwards Aquifer. And that's not the only place where we have some interesting diversity in blind cats in North America. Species recently discovered in the Sierra Madre and the Huastecan region is a separate species named in the same genus, but apparently something totally different on the other side of the slopes in northern Mexico. And indeed, we're looking at splitting that into 2 species. So there's a lot we don't know about these things. A little bit of geographic location. The large blue blob shows sort of the generalized range for the species. That red star right on the border, that's Del Rio, Texas. I won't go into the insect too much, but that shows that about 1/3 of the sites that were visited, these are known historical and likely sites in Mexico, yielded fish. There are 6 sites that we searched in good-looking habitat in Texas. We didn't find any fish at all. In fact, this was some of the first caving work I did back in 1998. And why were we even bothering to look in Texas for a Mexican fish? This is why. That big green blob with the red line going through it, that's the Edwards Aquifer. And that red line is the Mexican-US border. So it's now recognized that we share an aquifer with parts of northern Coahuila. And to a large extent, this has been unstudied. The flow routes on both sides are not well known. There's some work going on now, but suffice to say, we don't have a good idea about the relationships amongst blind cat populations within northern Mexico, nor necessarily whether they would be north of the river. That all changed in 2015 when blind cats were discovered in a cave on Amsterdam National Recreation Area. So this was like 2 decades or more after we looked and didn't find them. This discovery led to one of those Blues Brothers scenes where we basically called everyone and put the band back together. All the original researchers were back on board, and we hit the ground running. 4 months of staring at sardine cans in caves on 12-hour shifts resulted in us being able to obtain 2 individuals. So these are the first members of the species known from the United States. And when we did genetics, they're basically identical to their neighbors south of the river. So we know, if you saw that map earlier, the river actually sits on top of the aquifer. So we have aquifer organisms that can go left and right. They don't recognize borders. And then right when COVID shut us down, we found a second population in Amistad. And with the help of cave divers, we're able to obtain more individuals that currently live at San Antonio Zoo. So cave divers in the desert, what? Yeah, for real. That's how unusual the habitat is, and how you can imagine just how uncommon it is to find. Don't do it. Just what a needle in a haystack it is to find one of these magic portals that connects our surface world to that subterranean aquifer world, right? They got to be a human-sized portal. So those are we're very fortunate to have partners with the National Park Service. And so this effort resulted in a partnership with them to inventory all their cave and karst resources, particularly looking for the blind cat. So this is the gilded feather in the cap for the National Park Service. They have an ecosystem as species to focus on in terms of their management and developing the karst management plans. And then a bunch of other related things that members of this group of black cat researchers are particularly interested in. And with the revival of these efforts, we established this informal group known as the Blind Cat Working Group. So we have a cool logo. And here's first meeting of the blind cat working groups. We're actually straddling the international border in the center of Amistad Dam for various reasons going on at the time. In 2016, our Park Service friends were not allowed to visit Mexico, and our Mexican federal employees were not allowed to visit the U.S., but there's a meeting room smack dab in the middle of the bridge. So, you know, you do what you got. I'm sorry, I'll pick it up. So who cares? Look at this map. That big, huge black area that you see, that's the range of this species. There's nothing out there. You can see San Antonio, Nuevo Laredo, there's Del Rio, Eagle Pass, down in the bottoms of Monclova, right? You know, what's going on out there? Why should we be worried about this species? This is why. So, two things: the rise of industrial agriculture and the spread of scientific irrigation throughout this desert landscape, and also NAFTA, which led to incredible increases in industry along the U.S.-Mexican border, have depleted that part of the Edwards Aquifer by hundreds of feet. So when I say that a lot of those historic blind cat sites are dry, so are the farming communities that lived around them. So if people are still living there, they're working in the city because they can no longer farm at that scale. And another threat, an example here is, this is our fault. The largest brewery in the world takes all of its water from that part of the aquifer, and they ship all of their beer to the U.S. market. So if you like Modelo, think twice.
Oh,
all their beer.
Modelo beer.
Yeah.
Modelo.
Go to Mexico if you want to drink it.
Is that Piedras Negras?
Yeah, that's the Nava brewery, and it's just south of Piedras Negras, coal country there. So, you know, there's hope. The species is federally listed in both countries. There is joint management for the aquifers. The species is it's considered an iconic organism for resource managers on both sides of the border, and they're really proud to be able to say that they're managing for it. So that means a ton. And then also the fact that the two U.S. populations are on National Park Service property, that offers a lot of protections. So I'm going to move to the big bright spot on the map, right? We went from the dark one to the bright one and introduce a few more blind catfish. So we talked about the Priatella phreatophylla, that's the species I was just talking about. And this thing next to it, Trobloglanus, well, that's one of the two species that lives in San Antonio. Way over here, the far side of this tree, we have Satan, who's, by this tree, basically, Satan's closest relative is a flathead catfish. Priatella down in Mexico and on the border as well as Trochoplanus, their closest relative is like a bullhead catfish. So they're not each other's closest relatives. These are very long divergence times. And the example I give here is that we diverged from Neanderthals about 55 to 75,000 years ago. And these guys diverged about 50 million years ago. So 70 times longer on these branches than what we're looking at between us and the Neanderthals. I'm not talking about in-laws. Part of the reason for that is that the deep Edwards Aquifer is incredibly stable, right? Think of a deep sea environment without currents. Well, historically without currents. So it's an incredibly stable environment, and that allows for extremely specialized species that can only exist there to come about. I'm going to jump ship a little bit. I'm going to talk about some other really crazy critters that live in our drinking water. These are three species of aquifer adapted Eurasian salamanders that live in, I'm sorry, this slide's out of order, but the New Braunfels in Comal County, they have a species down there. I actually found the first specimens in a bowling alley, in a parking lot in a bowling alley, sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, in a well. The next is the famous Texas blind salamanders. The first species ever found at ESA is described over 100 years ago. That one up top, we first discovered in 2004. And then kind of in between the two, back in 2000, was when the Austin blind salamander was described. So these are all extreme troglodytes. They're totally blind, etc. Just a little close-up of that new species from New Braunfels. So I think it's pretty cool in this day and age that we can discover a new species of vertebrate in a bowling alley parking lot, right? So when you're driving down the highway and you look left and right and see strip malls and there's nothing special about this place, keep in mind that a couple of 100 feet underground or 800 feet underground, there are jewels that exist nowhere else on Earth. And that's a point of pride that we can all take home with us. Okay. That one's cool, and that one's rare. This one's cooler and rarer. So this is the Blanco blind salamander. This is my Moby Dick. I've been chasing it for a long time. Hopefully I'll find it. This is the only known specimen. And this was collected in 1951 from a crevice in the Blanco River down near San Marcos. And it's a crazy long story I'll tell you about sometime, but the only reason why there's one is because of a herring. And its name is robusta, muscular. It doesn't really look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but compared to a Texas blind salamander, it absolutely is. So if Arnold Schwarzenegger is a Texas blind salamander, this thing's Andre the Giant. So there you have in the right image, on the left is a large adult Texas blind salamander, and that's a holotype of robusta. I'll tell you one thing about it. I guarantee it eats the other one.
Oh.
And here's just a little map to show you, Austin's at the top, Bark Springs, we have Eurisia robusta in San Marcos, in the Blanco River, Eurisia rapuni in San Marcos Springs, and then this rapuni-like thing in New Braunfels. And what's cool is that each of these extreme aquifer species you see on the right side of this image, 5 more minutes? Okay, I'll run. They have a surface partner that lives in the springs. They're not necessarily each other's closest relatives, but they're splitting the niche, which is kind of cool. Okay, so there are a lot of them out there. These fish, unfortunately, there are very few specimens known. So if we look at the predator, Satan, there are only 19 known specimens. If we look at the bacterial fungal grazer, there are 43 known specimens. Bacteria and fungi, 8 to 1,200 feet deep in the aquifer, where's that coming from? These guys feed on organisms that grow at the bad water, good water interface. So word of the day is chemoautolithotrophic. So these are ecosystems that derive their source energy from mineral, non-organic sources. This is like deep sea vents, but in our drinking water. Very cool. And just a summary, most specimens were collected many, many years ago. So the result is for both Eurythia robusta and these blind cats, we have sort of the Schrodinger's uncertainty hypothesis, right? The cat in the box. We don't know if it's alive or dead. It's very hard to make recommendations or to effectively manage or decide not to if you don't know if it's alive or dead. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to answer that question. We're going to open the box. Super quickly, what we're doing is a cutting edge sampling technique where we use free-floating DNA that's present in the water. Any living organism sheds it all the time. You, me, that guy in the back, and Charlie. And these salamanders and fish do as well. We can sample a few liters of water from sites and then pass that through a very fine filter, precipitate the DNA off, and then run it through a blast to see what organisms are represented. I know, there's magic in that sample. So, remember how I talked about it's a needle in the haystack, and these portals that connect our world to their world are exceedingly rare. Water wells aren't rare. All I need is water. So it gets interesting then. Something that made this talk timely, a couple of weeks ago, Fish and Wildlife announced that they're proposing to list those two San Antonio blind cat as federally endangered. So there's going to be a lot more interest in these species real soon. 1,000-foot view, sorry Charlie. Here's just a general distribution of these organisms. And then here is a list that we've come up with of prospective wells covering the areas we want to sample for both the salamanders and the blind cats. That's too many. If we just look inside that red polygon, that encompasses all the known localities for the two species of blind salamanders. That's also too many wells. And keep in mind that these aren't little bitty wells. A lot of these are municipal supply wells, the big field down at AT&T 6 Stadium, so it's not as easy as opening a spigot. And last slide, Charlie. So a long list of people and entities that have supported this project, both financially, through collaboration, and volunteers. It's really fun when you see this becoming of interest in popular culture. So a few years ago, the Center for Biological Diversity Commission artists to go around the country making murals of endangered species found in those areas. And he showed up in Del Rio, and he did this huge mural of blind cats. So now when you go to Del Rio, folks know about blind cats, and guess what? They're proud of them. The one on the top, it's not too early to put this on your Christmas list. This is a new children's book coming out about blind cats, and it's a good story. A new book coming out about blind cats that was based on consultation with me and my collaborator on this project. So it's a fun one. And I think I have one more slide. Just thank you to the people who made this work possible. Thanks. We have time.
A lot of people don't maybe like the idea of thinking that water that they drink was maybe 5 minutes ago like next to an animal. What is it about these animals down in our aquifers that show this clean water down
I've spent 20 years searching for that one that I said is doing it in our water. So they're exceedingly rare. And if we ever find Eurythia robusta, we're not going to find tens of thousands of them. So it's maybe unfair to compare them to, say, a dog park or a chicken farm.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.